Major funding for Discovery Road brought to you in part by the Sangre de Cristo National Heritage Area, with additional funding from the Mormon Pioneer National Heritage Area and the National Park Service.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Discovery Road. I'm James Nelson. In this episode, we pay a visit to a place where many different people converged, crossed paths, all in search of a better way of life, and where one group in particular arrived, built up, celebrated, and then faded like a beautiful sunset. It's the enchanting story of the Japanese in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. The beautiful San Luis Valley of Colorado was a big attraction for many different people: Native Americans, early European explorers, Hispanics, Mormons, and the often forgotten Japanese. Each group contributing with farms, ranches, working the land, mining the hills, and building communities. In Alamosa, Colorado, at the San Luis Valley Museum, just beyond the American flag fluttering there, a fitting mural of a tree, recognizing the different cultures who were all part of the Valley portrait.
The first Japanese came to the Valley in the early 1900s to work on the railroads. Then by the 1920s, people had settled here and they were sending back for relatives and family and friends in Riverside, California. And during the 20s, they started moving to the Valley and built these truck farms, a lot of them with lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, peas, all cool season crops based on our climate here.
We happened upon this old-time train engine being restored, repaired, and prepared for a trip to Texas. It was the perfect reminder that the Japanese families came to the San Luis Valley for many reasons, including the railroad.
Alamosa in the San Luis Valley has a rich railroad history, hauling agricultural products, mining products, timber products. So the railroads of the San Luis Valley here go back to the 1880s, and they brought in immigrants from around the country as well as around the world and provided a lot of jobs for the people that were locally here. Pretty much covering all the different cultures and religions in the area. It was served by the Denver Rio Grande. And then you also have the San Luis Central and San Luis Valley Southern that ran off the Denver Rio Grande here in the valley. You, at one time, could take a train from here to Pueblo, here to Durango, here to Salida.
Hi there. You want some water?
These two sisters are holding on to a piece of important history. You see, Joseph Masahito Sato was one of the first Japanese to settle in the San Luis Valley. He introduced new crops and unpacked a new culture.
They were pretty good crops because I know they had a shed here that they take all that to Fort Garland to put in the train. They shipped it from Fort Garland on the trains. And also there was a train up to Jaroso, and he would take it to San Acacio because there was another train there.
He farmed the land and a lot of people worked for him. And that's how they survived. From what I understand, my grandfather was a generous person. So he helped people.
Sato's journey to America was eventful. At age 19, he was a fireman on a ship that sailed worldwide. Eventually, though, on the eastern seaboard of the U.S., the job was gone. So for him, it was a long train ride to faraway New Mexico. At a hotel in Chama, he found work as a cook, and of course met the dishwasher, Amelia Montano. And somewhere between cooking hot meals, pots, pans, plates, cups, forks, and saucers, they fell in love. But their courtship was certainly not smooth.
They told him to become a Catholic. He did. They told him that he had to pay so much money. I don't know how much money, but it must have been quite a bit for that time. And then he had to have a job. He had to have a place for them to live. Just basic things, I guess.
A mixed marriage, cultural differences, and some rough times doled out by the dominant culture as public trouncing of the unaccepted.
They would call them Japs, and they would call them, if something didn't go right, that was the time, I guess, My mother told me about times when they would get beat up. I really don't know the reasoning, but it was all because they were Japanese, basically.
The marriage lasted, the crops took hold, and Joseph Sato employed many with his farming knowledge that he learned from his father long ago in Japan. In an unusual twist, Sandra learned about her Japanese ancestry when she joined the military and was stationed in Japan.
What it taught me while I was in Japan is I learned the Japanese culture, I learned their traditions, and I learned how to cook some of their foods. And I think I learned to have some humility because they did go through a lot. They went through World War II, they had the Chinese there, they had a hard life. So when I got there, all that was behind them, but it was still there. So I felt that.
Little of the Japanese family history survived. The working farm is long gone. But despite years of struggle, the land remains in the family.
They would put this in the ground, and it was just so deep. And that's the little ditches that it made, is where they would put the seeds. And that's how they kept them in a row. They struggled during the 50s to pay for this farm because it was in the bank on a loan. And so I know my parents worked hard to get it. And that's how my dad created the junkyard, because that's what he did. And they bought it back. I know that when I was young today, I look back and I think we were poor in many things, but we were rich in family and food. We never had to worry about food. And we never had to worry about family. And so that is part of my heritage.
I believe that the story needs to be told because it's something that our community should be proud of. There's a lot of cultures in the community, so the Japanese is not the only culture, but there are other cultures that need to be told because it blends in the community. That's what we are today.
In this old black and white photograph, an important piece of the Japanese story is forever frozen in time. You can see it, all smartly dressed, polished and posing for a celebration. Underneath bonnets and fancy hats and neckties, determination on their faces, moms and dads, boys and girls, friends and families, a community brimming with anticipation while peering out into the San Luis Valley in search of an unknown future. Here in the beautiful San Luis Valley of Colorado, the potato is a wonderful story. Not just about spud varieties grown in deep, rich soil, filled with sun-soaked nutrients and farmed with the best hands.
Tractor equipment out there digging it up and putting it in, and then the harvester picks up, loads it in these trucks.
Got it?
They bring the trucks over here and back up here, and then we run over all those tables here.
But it's a story about a people, including the Japanese, who tilled the soil, planted seeds, cultivated the crops, and contributed mightily to the potato paradise now revered around the world.
It's a way of life. It's something that I was born into, I love, and you know, the thing about it, it's a challenge every day. I've never been bored in my life. I've been stressed, but never bored. And there's always, every year's a new year. I get to try something. I get to start over. You know, I mean, how many people can do that? How many people can go, you know, hey, I got a brand new year, I get to try it again.
Alfalfa, barley, and wheat are also grown on the farm, providing lots of jobs. It all started with his parents more than 75 years ago, when locals helped them plow into the soil 160 acres of cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, and lettuce.
Back when I was a child, I mean, there was a lot of Japanese people here, and almost all of them were in farming. And I guess there was the opportunity was here, and as my parents and them all aged, you know, they either children didn't want to continue in the farming operation, or else the business itself is really hard. Attrition just took its place over the years, just, you know, and it ended up with there's just a few Japanese farmers left in this area.
Watching the potato harvest can be mesmerizing, from the modern-day mechanics of tractors and the scooping of potatoes out of the earth, separating the rocks, sophisticated computers, filling truckload after truckload, and then more sorting as the spuds take another ride, this one into a warehouse where centennial russets are piled high and stored until they are sacked and headed for stores and restaurants around the country.
It's all fresh. It goes all over, but it's all fresh potatoes go like Costco and Walmart. They're probably the main buyers.
So right now we just got our truck loaded. Rosario unhooked me from the tow bar, so I'm gonna back up really slowly here. I get about midway past the harvester.
It's actually pretty enjoyable. I like it. It's the only other farming experience I've had is doing tobacco farming in Tennessee, and it's a lot messier. So potato farming's a lot cleaner and a lot more efficient, I would say. And then these guys are great to work with. They know what they're doing, and they're pretty patient with you too. So it's not bad at all.
This sprocket was loose, and then I think the chain just ended up getting loose.
Of course, they're always concerned about the weather on a farm operation, but there's another concern: when equipment breaks down. When it happens, it's not a good thing.
We got some Allen wrenches.
We had a few breakdowns yesterday, and then we were cleaning out the harvester because it gets filled up with dirt. When it gets filled up with dirt, it gets too much weight on it. And so as we were doing that, one of the systems messed up and the whole thing raised up, and then just the computer wouldn't let it go back down, basically. So we try to go till 7, but we can only go till 4 o'clock.
You know, we said we shouldn't work Sunday.
I go, what?
We're just going through the steps and processes of elimination, trying to get things diagnosed and figure out what is the issue, what's not turning on and everything. Hello.
It gets frustrating when you can't do the whole day because you only get this much done when we usually can get twice as much done in one day. So, but that's just part of it.
Let me try to reverse it, Byron.
What's it looking like, Chris?
I'm gonna tighten the fan belt and go from there. We'll start adjusting a few settings here and there, trying to get more of the clods taken out.
Eventually, the problem was fixed, and the harvest rolled on. Ironically, Kanugi often finds himself speaking Spanish with many of his workers. But his own native tongue never survived in the big San Luis Valley.
My family really didn't want us and didn't teach us to speak Japanese because they wanted us to probably assimilate into the culture more. So we were just taught to speak English all the time.
Not far from the Kanugi farm inside the Sierra Grande School, we found evidence of how many Japanese once lived around here. It was down a hallway, numerous photos, each one representing a family story. But one by one, they have moved away, found work elsewhere, and just like the Japanese language, nearly all disappeared.
I wished I'd had the chance to learn it and be fluent in it. But it's just how it is. I wish there was an older generation to teach us, and we're losing so much of that culture now. And I mean, I miss my parents. I miss people like Bessie and all them, because there's so much knowledge and so much history, so much food and all this stuff that we are going to lose.
How long are you going to do this?
Probably till I die. If I didn't have kids and interested in that, I would quit and do something else maybe. But for right now, as long as I have kids there, I want them to have the chance to be involved in it. I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of what we've done, and a lot of other farms that have done well. Anybody in agriculture needs to be proud, because I mean, we're doing this for a nation to produce and all that, and I think what a great job to have.
On the campus of Adams State University, there's a beautiful Japanese-American memorial garden honoring the first generation of Japanese settlers in the Big San Luis Valley. Outdoor art pieces depicting cranes, long-standing symbols of Japanese culture, perched above running water, reminders of the pioneer gifts from the Japanese.
So I paint the cranes a lot, and the Japanese people believe the crane is for good fortune and happiness. And so they believe that a crane can live 1,000 years. I just always was inspired by that and like to paint them.
During our visit, the Japanese presence was much less from decades past. Today, the language is not readily heard. Traditional food, mostly unavailable. Even the Buddhist temple is now out of business. All of that diminishing culture sent us to one woman in particular, Bessie Konishi.
That's why I've got so many things in my home. And not only for that reason, but because I love it. I love the Japanese culture. I'm proud to be a Japanese. I love their ways. I love the way they keep their traditions alive.
Her given name was Miyako Yoshida, one of 12 children of Frank and Isao Yoshida. It was commonplace for names to be changed back then to fit into the neighborhood, so she became Bessie. The family farm became prolific, producing cabbage, cauliflower, and her father became known as the lettuce king of the San Luis Valley.
Stapled in the field, they will not be reopened until they arrive at retail outlets as far away as the eastern seaboard.
They had to be sharecroppers because they couldn't own land. They had a picture of my father, my uncle, and a good friend farming together south of Alamosa here. They told how they had grossed $10,000, and this was back in, oh my gosh, like 1930 or so. It was before I was born. And it made the Denver papers with their potatoes that year. $10,000 back then would probably be what? Close to $1 million here, nowadays, yeah. I would say like in the 40s, there were quite a few Japanese families here. And as I said later, a lot of them did come from other parts of Colorado too. Most of them are farmers, the majority of them are farmers.
In 1937, there were enough Japanese in the San Luis Valley to build their own Buddhist temple. And right there, at the dedication, 5-year-old Bessie. It quickly became the hub for the Japanese. It served as a language school and entertainment center.
Oh, we used to have Buddhist celebrations there too. We would celebrate Buddha's birthday in April. And so we would learn Japanese dances and we'd dress in kimono. Everybody would bring Japanese food. We'd have a big celebration. Anniversaries were celebrated there. Weddings were celebrated there.
Early on, the church struggled, but they survived through innovation.
In the Buddhist church, when they first started, they didn't have enough money, to buy songbooks for everybody. And so they wrote the Japanese songs on white sheets of cloth in Japanese. And they were tacked on a frame in the front of the church. And as the songs were sung, then someone would flip the next page, just like you would in a book, only it was written on sheets.
Over time, the families moved out and moved on. Gradually, the church became less vital. It was too expensive to keep open, and it was sold. As war sent fear across the land, places like the Lahara Church were desecrated. And this photograph shows not only a community in mourning and the loss of one of their own because he fled California during the Roundup, but a lasting image of dignity that would soon diminish.
My mother's side, we had cousins in Norwalk, California, and so they came. And they were not farmers, they lived in the city. And so they were trying to farm, and back then they were still using horses. This was in the 40s. And so he wasn't used to that, and the horses ran away, and the wagon ran over him and killed him. And they got permission to hold his funeral in the boarded up Buddhist church in Lahara. And afterwards, they took a picture with his casket in the front and everybody who was there at the funeral so they could send it back home to Japan to his relatives. It's a very, very sad picture.
The picture that Bessie remembers from more than 70 years ago is sealed in her mind's eye about a trip to the store to buy groceries.
I was, 10 years old when the war broke out, and so, there was a lot of prejudice at school, of course. We were called Japs all the time. A lot of the stores in town here at Alamosa did not want us in their stores. Did not want us to come in their stores. There was one small grocery store on the south side of town where all the Hispanics lived, the south side of Alamosa, a Lebanese couple, and they told us we were welcome to come into their store. And this still makes me cry to this day. They said that it was not our fault we were at war with Japan, and we were welcome to come into their store.
A new beginning when she married Ben Konishi. He would become a revered veterinarian in the San Luis Valley for 66 years. But the early days were anything but easy. Bessie's ironing board served as his first operating table. And there were those who avoided his practice because of his race. The ugliness continued involving their children, prejudice and harassment, prompting Bessie to start a kindness program throughout the Valley school system.
She wanted to make a difference because she understood what it meant to be not only a woman, but a Japanese woman growing up in an era of fear during World War II. And in the San Luis Valley, she has taken upon herself to educate people about being tolerant. She gives programs on the culture of the Japanese and what the influences were in the San Luis Valley with the Japanese community.
These 2 panels are just 2 of 4 that were made when the Lahara Church was built, and they were written by 2 different Buddhist priests. The one on this side says, Daijo Aki Koto Nakude. That means Jodo Shinshu sect, never give up your belief. And on this side it says, Itsumo Myoterasu Nari, always believe in you. If you believe in that, it will always believe in you. And it was written by Tamai Yoshitake Tamai.
Trips to Japan with her grandchildren, and a promise that each will get a chance to select a Japanese artifact from her museum-like home. Ongoing mentoring from the unofficial family historian. She taught us a very important Japanese word, gamen, which means patience, enduring the unbearable with dignity.
Father, Eiichi Yoshida, passed away in 1964, and my mother, Isayo Yoshida, passed away in 1992. And you can see the Buddha symbol on both of them too.
Bessie's lifelong journey to tell the Japanese story is an artful walk of perseverance and a lasting lesson for all of us.
People aren't going to remember. No. Because there weren't very many of us. And we weren't loud. We weren't, we were quiet. Yeah. No, they're not going to remember. That's why I feel it's so important for me to get it down, Get it written down, talk about it. We shouldn't be forgotten. We were a part of the history here in the San Luis Valley. An important part.
The signature of the Japanese can be found all across the San Luis Valley. Their story of work, sacrifice, and struggle should never be lost. And the beauty and spirit of their contributions ought to be admired as a proud story of elegance, like a crane in search of a smooth flight through life. I'm James Nelson. We'll see you next time out here on Discovery Road.